Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Switch Statement Podcast. It's a podcast for investigations into miscellaneous tech topics.
This is episode 1 in our series on the design of everyday things by Don Norman.
Hey, John, how's it going?
Hey, Matt. It is going well. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right.
Nice.
Yeah, new year. Feeling
New book?
New book. Everything's new. Just
Yeah.
throw 2022 away and start everything anew.
Exactly.
But yeah, I'm excited to get into this design of everyday things. I feel like are we getting off the reservation here in terms of is that an offensive term?
I hope not. I've always liked that term, but yeah, maybe it's offensive.
So anyway, regardless, are we getting outside of the original remit of Switch Statement into design of everyday things?
This book does feel, and maybe this is what you're referring to, is this is like way further away from, technical stuff than, the previous book was. But what's interesting is like, I was thinking about all these things through the lens of a technician. Yes. And also I really like this first chapter because he was very critical of technical people, like very critical of engineers. And honestly,
I loved it.
Yeah, I loved it too. Cause I hate engineers. I'm a self-loathing engineer. And I also very much dislike a lot of engineering decisions. And, I almost feel like this book is going to be cathartic.
Or if anything, we're going to just deepen your disdain for engineers.
I'm sure that will be the case. Oh, that's funny. I literally use that word in my notes to describe engineers. I just find it funny that you said the same
disdain?
Thing. Disdain, yeah. But yeah, I think what's going to happen is we're going to get this outside perspective that we don't get a lot of the time because I'm constantly immersed in this world of engineers. So it'll be nice to just have someone on the outside making fun of us. I think that will actually be satisfying to me.
I mean, if anything, maybe this podcast could be two engineers read X, We're just all right, let's read about the history of art through the lens of two random engineers.
Yeah, where the wild things are. Let's do it.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a lot of rich. It's probably a rich vein to mine. Murray Sendak, he's a badass.
He's a baller.
Okay, so what did you think? So this chapter, let's say this chapter is called. Just a heads up, this book is laid out basically completely differently than The Art of Game Design. Right. The Art of Game Design had 1 trillion pretty small chapters, and this book is broken down. It's a much shorter book, first off, and second, it's broken just into 7 mondo chapters. So this series should be shorter in theory.
Yeah, we'll see.
But that's always a classic. Famous last words.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Did you notice when you looked at the cover of the book, the visual gag that is on there?
Yeah, which he mentioned in the first chapter as well. Apparently someone gave him a physical. So yeah, I'll try to describe it. It's this teapot, but the spout is on the same side of the handle or as the handle. In fact, it's right above the handle. So obviously pouring from the spout will just pour right onto your hand. And he mentions this as being one of his favorite physical manifestations of bad design.
And maybe in this case, it's obvious someone didn't accidentally design this. This is some an art project essentially.
Right.
But he it's so funny because when I looked at the book, it didn't even register. I looked at the cover and okay, it's a teapot, and it just goes to show you how sometimes something can look, past all of the visual tests and then only like when you go to use it, you realize like, oh wait, like why does it work this way?
Yes.
You know, and in a way, it's almost like it's obvious. Like if you thought about it for a second, you would realize in this case. But there's a bunch more cases where it's so much more sinister, where you can look at something and it can, you know, on its face value, look totally reasonable, and then you go to use it, and it's terrible.
Yes.
So I think it's basically a metaphor for that.
Right, and it's to me, it's a powerful metaphor because I see this all the time in my profession, where you're making a decision in a certain context, where you know you can think of this teapot as just thinking about the visual aspect of it.
Right.
You know, you're not actually thinking of someone using it. You're thinking of just, oh, this is these are the aspects of a teapot. It's got a spout, it's got a handle. I'm just going to put them wherever.
Yeah.
This happens in engineering all the time, where you're thinking about a problem through the context of just, you know, I'm trying to move bits.
Like checklist. Gotta have this. I gotta have that.
Right. I'm just trying to paint the screen with some series of bits, and it's. If you're not thinking of that usability angle, you're going to make mistakes. You know, you're going to basically create this teapot in software form.
Yes. And then everyone will suffer.
Were you worried at all that he was just going to complain about doors this whole chapter?
Oh, yes. I was very concerned.
Yeah, the book starts out with basically a rant about doors, and he brings up, you know, apparently there's this thing called a Norman door, which is like a poorly designed door. You can't tell if you're supposed to push it or pull it. And he ranted about doors for quite a bit. And I was like,
this
is this
seems
whole
to be
entire
a defining aspect of this guy's personality.
Yeah. No, I did love the nerding out about like random, like at one point he talks about cones. Like, you know, one of his favorite design things were these like cones that, you know, make it look like you can't pass through them.
Yes.
But you can just run them over.
Yes. Yeah.
And he was just talking about how this was like, you know, one of his favorite design observations. It was just such a nerdy thing. I totally loved it.
Talking like in our last episode when we were wrapping up Art of Game Design, we were talking about the whole like old, you know, wizened elder giving you their history of their life. Essentially, this feels a lot like that.
Yes, which I absolutely love. Just to be clear, like I know I'm calling him a nerd, but like just the idea that you can see something like that, something that would be so unremarkable to pretty much anyone, and have this, you know, deep experience with design and seeing poor design and good design, and also understanding like, you know, I can't remember the term for it. It was like an anti-affordance or something.
Anti-affordance, yeah.
Yes, like sort of understanding like what that means and the significance of it. I just thought was pretty cool.
One quick point I wanted to say, just like from the lens of, oh, nice. I can say lens of again and not have to like worry about it sounding like stupid or weird. But anyway, he just has this quick sentence which just like it makes me, it gives me like a positive or like vibe about him. He says like he's talking about how he became known for this like Norman door, which is a door that doesn't work well, as you had said. And it's like, I'm pretty sure that's not what my parents planned for me. And it's just like, you know, it's just a little bit of humility where it's like, okay, this guy isn't, when I was originally hearing about it, like I was a little concerned this guy was going to come from the angle of like design purity and like, this is the, like, you know, I'm going to set down this godly design before you. And, and these are all the, but he doesn't have that vibe at all. You know, He has this very practical, like, no, like, it's not about how good it looks. Like, you can design a door that looks beautiful and works like crap. And he's like, I care about the fact that it doesn't work very well. Like, I'm not worried about the fact that it looks amazing. And I found that really reassuring.
Right. Yeah. He also struck me as, like, obviously this book is going to talk about defining design and talking about like a taxonomy of objects and, you know, like affordances, signifiers, mappings, all these definitions of things. but he also strikes me as someone who's probably, at least at the end of the day, like not super pedantic, like probably more practical about design. And he even mentions this story where he was speaking to one of his mentors, who sounds like he was an amazing designer, but he was kind of questioning some of his mentors' like fundamental beliefs about design. Yeah. And his mentor just like turned his hearing aids off so that he couldn't hear what he was saying, which I feel like part of the reason he told that story was to say that he doesn't approach it in that way. Like he is constantly sort of questioning like his own premises, which I think is just a useful way of thinking about things.
Who, like, he kind of left that ambiguous who was right in that situation, or who he thought was right in that situation.
Yeah.
Because the conversation was, do you remember what it amounted to? It was like whether or not there's any processing that goes on when you see something, or whether it's kind of just like immediately available to you.
Yeah, that was the crux of it. I don't remember kind of the exact things, but it was basically this: how much processing does something go through in the human brain before the brain like makes a decision of how to interact with it? And I guess his mentor thought that there was very little processing. At least this is what I recall. And he sort of thought there's all these layers of processing. There's, there's kind of the cultural aspect to it, which I thought was really interesting. He mentions culture and how that comes into play with design, and all these other layers. So,
he like, it's funny because when I would expect, structurally, if someone was telling a story about a disagreement, I would imagine that it would generally be to show a case where they thought one thing and they were convinced by another person.
Yeah.
But in a way, because otherwise it comes off as kind of like this humble braggy, like, oh, this other person thought this thing, and I just like showed them up because mine was like obviously more correct.
Right.
But I think that's actually wound up like, that's what I think. I think there is. And like, actually my fundamental belief is kind of like unknowable, and it's like not something worth discussing as to how much processing is going on.
Yeah. Which I think is kind of where he landed. I mean, he said later in the chapter, like, oh, I may have disagreed with this guy or whatever, but that's sort of not what it's about. And he also mentioned something else that this other guy defined, which I wish I remembered, but I think that that's what he was really trying to get at, was this thing that the guy had defined. I should have written this down, obviously, but I think that argument in itself wasn't super important to what he was eventually trying to say.
Right. When I wanted to call out one point that I thought was very interesting, which is that, and this is in the preface. He says the criteria that people use to determine what to purchase has surprisingly little overlap with the aspects that are important during usage. So it's like the set of things that people use to determine if they should buy it. Like, it's like, it doesn't matter once they get it home, like, and they're actually using it. Like, that's because it's like they care, like, do their friends have it? Like, does it is it shiny?
Is there a good looking person?
Yeah,
holding it.
Exactly. Like, is the store cool? Like, is there a neat display?
Yeah.
And then they get home, and like, there's just a whole another set of, and I mean, I think this kind of speaks to what you were saying before about like pitching, or we were saying the last time about pitching, where it's like, you have to do all the work, like you have to do the meat and potatoes of like the actual work, but then you have to do the like the almost completely separate work of selling it. There's two different problems.
Oh yeah, no, and it happens all the time where, crummy product but really good salesman, or the opposite, great product but no good salesman, so it just kind of goes unnoticed.
Yeah.
So he mentioned 3 types of design: industrial, interaction, and experience. And I don't know if we want to define those things, but I just wanted to mention one thing about that. at one point he was talking about experience design and designing events, like, like a concert or like a, fire festival or whatever. Like, and I found that really interesting because I don't think a lot of people, obviously like events need to be coordinated and need to be thought out or whatever, but people don't think about like designing events a lot. And one thing I was reading about recently was crushes. Have you heard of this? Where like...
Oh, like a crowd crush?
Yeah, like a crowd crush,
oh, God.
basically. Yeah, which is a horrible event.
Yeah.
Man, I feel like I'm always bringing up the downers. But anyway, like I was reading about a bunch of different crushes, and almost all of them were because of event design.
Yeah.
Where, either the designer of the event just hadn't thought of like, oh, maybe people will want to leave really quickly, or like, they thought they were doing the right thing by blocking a door, but in actuality, like blocking that door was what caused the crush.
Yeah.
Or they
or
put
even just like not being sure how many people, like being intentional about how many people are going to be able to safely be at this event.
Right. Yeah. So it's just yet another aspect of, design and generally, like I feel like design comes into play with almost everything we do. And a lot of the times people aren't thinking about design. They're not thinking about like, oh, how are humans actually going to be using this thing? But it's like even in an event, you have to be thinking of how these things are going to be used and what could go wrong and all that.
Right. I think the casual assessment of design is someone, there's either a physical object or not, newly there's a user interface. And so, but importantly, it's this concrete thing. It's like, oh, this person is designing like how this physical object looks or this concrete user interface looks. But it doesn't. People don't think about how. I mean, maybe like interior design, it starts to get into there where it's like, oh, well, they're not designing like a physical product. They're kind of designing this orientation of elements. But then like you have something even more kind of nebulous, which is like designing the order of events in this, but that's still design because you're really trying to convey or produce a particular emotion,
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's so easy to like just be too practical about something like, oh, I need to have this series of things take place, so I'm just going to like put them in, whatever order.
Yeah.
But no, you need to be really focusing on like the design, like what are people going to, be perceiving and experiencing when this series of events happens. Just looking forward to like reading more about this stuff.
One of the things that he talked about was that he made this point where everyone designs their own, you're designing your own space. You're designing how your desk is laid out. Yeah. And it's like, maybe you're not thinking about it like that, but all of these decisions, it's just implicit design. And it's probably, if you're not thinking about it and you're not thinking about your own experience when using it, it's probably not a very good design, frankly. Yeah. And I mean, I suffer from this because like, I don't know that that I'm thinking critically about all of these different aspects of my life.
Oh yeah. No, same. So, yeah, it's funny, like even how you present yourself is part of like this overall design. And, like I'm a total nerd. I know that I've probably presented myself historically as, just an introverted nerd. But, that's something you need to be cognizant of and, work on sometimes.
I think that is kind of a superpower because I think generally people they'll just kind of naturally fall into one of a couple of different buckets. Mm-hmm. But if this is something that you think critically about, you can kind of make some decisions about taking a couple of steps outside of those standard buckets. And then, you're just kind of a more interesting person, I think, that way.
Totally. One thing he sort of alluded to, or maybe this is just something I've thought about a lot, so I might have been like inventing this in the chapter, but something I see in engineering, and I'm not sure what to call this. I'm going to call it like an egotism of design, where like, let's say you're trying to solve a really hard problem I think there's an impulse that you have to kind of reveal to the user that you have solved this really hard problem.
Yes.
And you kind of like, it's almost like you make the user have to deal with the hard problem. And I wonder if he's going to talk more about this, because at least in software, I see this all the time where there's like a library or there's an API, and the terminology or, you know, just the way that you use the library or API, you need to gain this understanding of this complex problem that the authors solved. You know, the authors have figured this problem out. They should be hiding this problem from you. But I think, and this is just my assumption, but I feel like sometimes engineers let those things bubble up as sort of a way to like brag, like, hey, I figured this out. You know, it's a really awesome thing. Now you have to sort of figure it out too in order to like use my thing. And I wonder if he's going to talk about this more, where like this is kind of a form versus function type thing. So I'm sure he's going to touch on this more.
I don't think this is exactly the same as what you described, but there's this other thing that companies do that like really bother me, which is like they'll go through a redesign and then there's like way too much fanfare about the redesign. It's like, and they're like bragging to you like, oh, like here's the redesign, like it looks amazing, like isn't this great? And it's like, listen, I'm coming to your product to get something done.
Yeah.
I care 0%.
Yes.
You just made my life harder by doing this redesign.
Exactly, yeah.
Like you should be coming to me like hat in hand, being like, hey, I know everything is different now, but
right.
We think that this is actually going to be better for everyone in the long term, and this is why. But no, they're like like this design's amazing. Like, isn't redesigning things fun? Like, we are so proud. And it's like, no.
Oh yeah,
that's not totally the tone you should be taking right now, because you've just been really annoying to me. And I think like there is a narcissism of redesign, I think, with like in these companies.
Totally.
And I think companies should really fight not to do like gratuitous redesigns.
Yes, I think that's very similar to what I'm referring to. It's kind of this like, it's almost like just a bragging about like something you've done, and it's like, no, I'm just trying to solve problems here. Like I need to be able to use your thing as quickly as possible and get my job done. I really don't care about what you've done. And if anything, like I would prefer it if there was no, you know, just absolutely no friction to the usage of your thing. You know, like I don't have to learn about your new design or your, you know, some terminology or whatever.
Right.
He told the story about 3 Mile Island.
Yes. Yeah. He did not. I hope he goes into more detail about this.
So I looked it up. Yeah.
Okay.
He did not elaborate at all. He mentions, you know, 3 Mile Island, which was like a nuclear disaster, and how the actual problem was a design flaw. And then he just moved on.
Yep.
And it was like, wait a second,
and he was
bro.
like, yeah, this was inevitable. And then like didn't give any insight into the design of like the instrumentation panel or anything.
Yes. So I had to look this up because I was like, oh my God, like you can't just leave me hanging like that. So evidently there was a valve. And like I just copied this explanation from Wikipedia. I don't really know what any of this stuff means, but there was a valve that was basically stuck open during a test, during like an initial test of the reactor. So they added a light, and next to the light, it said, you know, RC RV2 open, which is kind of like, you know, would signify that the valve is open. During the actual disaster, this light turned on, and so people thought the valve was open, but then it turned off. The light actually turned off. So the operators thought that the valve had closed. But in actuality, the valve was stuck open. Like the light did not actually signify the status of the valve. It like the light signified what it thought the status of the valve was, but there was a malfunction. Okay. So the operators were all thinking that this valve was closed when in actuality it was open. And that was,
and they should have attempted to close the valve.
Yes, yeah. So the operators, you know, for a long time with 3 Mile Island, they didn't know what the problem actually was.
Oh, that's interesting.
And if they had had a better indication that this valve was stuck open, then they could have actually fixed the problem, probably before more bad things happened.
That is interesting because that does not smack of a design problem to me, though. It sounds like this, like the problem was not that the light, unless there's almost certainly a lot more to like, what happened. It was probably a complicated series of events, but like, I guess my point is, it sounds like if that light were working correctly, they would have been able to address the situation. Is that true?
Well, what he says is the light indicated that the PORV pilot valve solenoid was powered. So I think basically the light was, one layer of indirection too far away from reality. Yeah. Like the light should have actually indicated that like the valve was open or closed via some sensor or something like that. But it sounds like the light indicated that, actually the light kind of indicated nothing. Like it indicated that, the power was being sent to the valve to open.
Right. Exactly. Right. And I mean, this is also a lesson in making sure you're measuring what you think you're measuring.
Right. This is why I hate derivations. Software, like a huge thing in software is caching, right? Which caching is derived. It's you're not going to the horse's mouth. You're using some pre-calculated value. Oftentimes it is the value, but it's just stored in memory. Yeah. But a lot of times also it's some calculation that's based on some underlying values. And just a huge source of bugs. I mean, whenever you're not going to the horse's mouth, there's this, chance that your information could be out of date or, just your calculations could be based off not the correct values. Yeah.
One thing I wanted to talk about is, so I don't know if I actually said what the title of this chapter was. It's called The Psychopathology of Everyday Things, which I guess leads me to, like, I took this to mean he's talking about how things are so terrible. And he does spend a decent amount of time, like, listing examples of things that are poorly designed. Mm-hmm. But then he goes on to, do a more like generic breakdown of, design specializations, like you were talking about before with experience design and human-centered design. He talks about signifiers and affordances. So in a way, I feel like this chapter kind of struck me as a little bit discombobulated, maybe, or like not. It didn't seem like Psychopathology of Everyday Things was a good descriptor for the scope of stuff that he covered in this chapter.
I'll be honest, I did not actually read the name of the chapter. I had no idea. I had no idea the chapter was called Psychopathology.
Really good word, but what's that?
What does psychopathology mean exactly?
Well, pathology is like, pathos is like suffering. And so like if you ever hear about pathology, it's like something's going wrong. And so like psychopathology is like, I guess, psychological suffering as a result of everyday things.
Okay. So yeah, I guess psychopathology would lead me to believe he'd complain about doors the entire chapter.
Right. So, I mean, given that name, you like, that would have been a more fitting content for this chapter.
Yeah. I think he just really liked that POET, the poet acronym. So right. he had to keep that in there somehow.
Exactly. What did you think about he spent a lot of breath discussing affordances and signifiers. And yeah. I'm curious, are you familiar? Have you heard people use the term affordance in software design?
I have never heard the term affordance in software design. Okay. I have heard the term signifier, and I think I do recall having confusion around like a signifier just showing where an action can happen, like, and distinguishing it from the actual action that's happening. I think I'm trying to think of the term that I've heard instead of affordance, like maybe action. Because I've definitely discussed
Like
these
a hint
concepts
or, I don't
before.
know, yeah.
Yeah, like these concepts, are super prevalent in software, obviously, but I just think I've used different terminology in the past.
I have definitely directly, and I don't remember where I learned this term originally, but I have heard it in the explicit misuse that he describes, where it's like, oh, can we add an affordance for XYZ?
Yeah,
Just to indicate that a user can do something.
right.
And that is the usage that he seems to be like bristling about.
Yes. Well, and it's interesting. Like I wrote down some examples because I think there's so many things that are both affordances and
Yes.
signifiers. Like an
That's
elephant's
why
tusks.
that's why I'm almost like not. I almost think like why are you wasting so much time distinguishing like I almost think, is it worth it to distinguish these two concepts? Like maybe you just have one thing and it's like everything.
Yeah. And it's funny because I was just talking before about how I don't think he's very pedantic, but he was being pretty pedantic about these two things.
This is the one exception where he seems to really have a bee in his bonnet around people misusing affordance.
Yeah.
Which it's like affordance is like what the thing does. So it's like it's the features.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like if you're adding an affordance, it means like you are adding something that a user can do with it.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like, is anyone ever going to talk? Like they're like, no, I'm going to like add the ability to sit in the chair. I'm not going to be like, oh, can we add an affordance for like sitting in the chair? And it's like, no one is going to say that.
Right.
They're just going to say what the user should be able to do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I actually like the word features. And now that I'm thinking about it, I think that's the term that I hear most often in my world. Because feature to me is very different from a signifier, signifying that a feature exists versus the feature itself. And yeah, I just, because even after he like described all these differences, I still found myself like slightly confused.
Yeah, it's a very subtle distinction. So, and it's funny because I don't think I realized it until now. It's like, well, we have a word and the word is feature in software design. So maybe that's why it feels a little funny to have this other thing. But it's like, so maybe it's not a problem that he attempted to define affordance. But it just so happens that there's already a word. And, maybe this affordance is like more useful because are you going to call it a feature in a physical product? Maybe. I don't know.
I do, but I think I just talk weirdly.
Yeah.
He talked about accidental signifiers, which I really liked.
Okay. Yeah. What were some of the ones that he...
Well, he mentions books and like a bookmark. And, the point of a bookmark is to show where you are in the book. But there's this kind of accidental signifiers that it also kind of shows like your completion percentage
yes.
of the book, which I liked. And I wrote down one of my favorite things with old books was, how hardcover books have that jacket? Mm-hmm. And you can kind of like shove one of the leaves of the jacket into the book as a bookmark. Exactly. And one of the unintended features of hardcover books that I like the most was that point where you like stop using the front
had to switch
leaf
to the back one.
And you switch. It's kind of this like super satisfying
reading long books.
Yeah, no. It's it's something we miss when we're using Kindles, but that was always like this incredibly satisfying event. Like, oh, now I'm using the back leaf.
Yeah, that's hilarious. No, I definitely remember doing that. Although I'm all digital. Like, it's funny because I know that having a physical book means that no one can ever like take it away from you. If Amazon, I don't know, if Kindle folds, those books are just, away with I just kind of like disappear into thin air. So,
yeah.
But I just don't want stuff. That's my big thing with books. So I'm off the book train.
Yeah. I've realized like I do still read, paperback and hardcover books sometimes, but I think it's actually just a way to like get away from computers for a little bit, like get away from the screen. 'Cause I love Kindles. Like I don't have one, but I like reading on like an e-ink device.
Yeah.
But yeah, he also mentions this like sink example, which I found hilarious, where he was at a hotel, like in Europe or something, and he couldn't figure out how to drain his sink. And it turned out that you had to like click in the drain. Like you had to basically put your finger into the disgusting water that had accumulated and like click in the drain. And the reason I wrote this example down in my notes is I feel like I've seen this in software before, where people try to be clever. Like they kind of take this existing problem that has a well-known idiom or well-known solution, and they try to like, you know, kind of throw it on its head and say like, oh, we're going to solve it this way now. And it's like, no, don't ever do that. Don't ever be clever. Be as dumb as possible. You know, if anything, be like so dumb that it seems ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like that's actually the right decision, to just be absolutely dumb.
Oh my God. This just happened to me. I'm not sure how good of an example this is, but I think Apple, you know, we complimented Apple quite a bit last time, I think. But one thing I will say about Apple is like they suffer from this all over the place, where they're just unnecessarily rethinking things.
No.
Like I just wanted to set a desktop background, and so okay, you have this interaction. You want to set your desktop background to a custom image on your system. Like, how would you do that?
Right click on the desktop.
Okay, but so like let's say you already have, you're in the like desktop. Yeah, so you right click on the desktop, you say change background. Now you have that window that is like how you change the background. You have all the presets, and then you want to give people the ability to choose a custom image.
Yeah.
How would you do that? How would you like add that?
Click and drag an image onto a spot, or have like a browse button.
Right. So a file browser, right?
Yeah, file browser. Yeah.
Like you have like a choose a file. But fucking no, that's not possible, because you just have to add a folder of images, and then you have to pick the image from the folder. It's like, why the fuck do you have to add a folder? It's like, no, I have a specific image somewhere on my system. This is in my documents folder. I don't want all of my fucking images in my documents folder to show up in my... I just want a specific image in my documents folder.
Yeah.
Like, why do I have to add... So it's like, it's not doing a good job of refreshing when I add... You know, I apparently need to like close this thing and reopen it to see the file. So anyway, it's just a perfect example of like, we have a metaphor. This is a solved problem.
Right. Yeah.
Like, and someone kind of comes along and like rethinks it. And it's like, oh, you know what? Someone's probably going to have a directory of their desktop images. It's like, yeah, maybe. But like someone might just have one file in a directory with a bunch of other random ass images, and they don't want to add all of them.
Yeah. And now it's funny because, I mean, we've discussed this before, and I always wonder if it's just my like preconceived notions about how things should work, but I find Mac OS to be absolutely infuriating.
Oh,
like, I'm just constantly trying to do something that I think is simple, and I just have to do, you know, jump through hoops to figure out how to do it. Like even, and the file browser in particular.
The file browser is just so bad.
Yeah, it's just straight garbage. It's like a lot of times I can't even figure out how to get to a file. It's like I have to right click the file browser and say go to and like type an actual URL. It's like, what is this trash? Like I don't know. It's just,
I think like the only world where any of this makes sense is like they find that like users get confused by certain folders. But what's like brain breaking is they have the ability to show show hidden folders.
Yeah.
Cool. Like that has everything, right? No, there are still files that they don't show you even when you've asked to. Like, this is what drives me insane.
Yeah.
This is what drives me insane about Mac OS. It's like, do you want to see the .ds store files? It's impossible. You cannot see it in the file browser.
Until you commit it to a repository and see it on your other computer.
It's like, until you fucking zip it with this file, and it's like, oh wait, why is there this other entry of binary data in this fucking zip? It's like, oh wait, Mac OS created a DS store file that I cannot even see unless I like ls. It's like, why do I anyway? So
no,
you have to like cut off some of the ranting in this.
I do worry that both of us are we're just not as familiar with Macs. So, but at the same time, it's like we're both generally smart people, and like I've used tons of different operating systems. Like I've used Linux, Windows, Mac, and I just have not gotten these pains from any other operating systems that I've used.
I think it's this non-uniformity, I guess, is what really frustrates me. Like, it's like, fine, hide the stuff.
Yeah,
that's great. But when I ask you to unhide something, like, you should unhide things uniformly. Do I need to have like a super unhide? Like, I just want to see everything. I just don't understand. Like, I think this is the thing. I don't understand the rules that they're using to decide.
Yeah, they're arbitrary.
It's arbitrary.
Yeah.
And like, just like the set of applications that you can't remove from Mac OS. It's like this random bag of, it's like, okay, the chess application is a critical part of the system integrity check. Like, it's like, why can't I delete chess.app from my Mac? Like, it's just arbitrary. Some random engineer at some point was like, all right, well, just like add it to the list of default programs that the user it's impossible to remove.
Yeah. Now, the only way to get Apple to make logical decisions is to pass legislation. Like, you have to use USB-C, guys. Like, we don't want to use your stupid cables.
Yeah, exactly. So someone, all right, EU, I'm relying on you.
Yeah, pass laws.
Allow me to delete the chess app. All right. Well, let's get off our Apple rant.
He talked about. Yeah, go ahead.
Just an additional point about the I mean, he had another example here about an unintended signifier. Like he shows someone like adds a coffee cup to like this flat surface, and so he talks about how the flat surface is an affordance for someone putting something on top of it, and then someone puts a single coffee cup on top of it, and now that becomes a signifier that signifies, oh, it's okay to put a coffee cup here. So then a bunch of other people put coffee cups there.
Right.
And I think that was a really useful example where it's like, just consider like there are all these unintended signifiers, and it's like people are going to do things when there's a signifier that indicates that they can do it.
Right.
And you need to keep your mind open to like, oh, could someone do something that could create something that would indicate they could do something else? It's like this second order signifier in a way.
I have an extremely weird example of this that we can just cut if it like doesn't make sense.
All right, please do.
But I am constantly talking with my wife about the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law, and how I am a spirit of the law person. Like, I like to understand why a law exists and match my behavior to the rationality behind the law. And the example I would use is our building has a parking lot. So my wife and I park our car in this parking lot, and there is a trash can in the parking lot that is only for use by, people who can use the lot. But you can reach in through the bars. There's like a fence, and you can reach in through the bars and drop stuff in the trash can. Mm-hmm. I'm just not realizing how stupid this example is. But my wife and I will be walking our dog, and we'll have a bag of poop, and we'll be like, oh, let's throw this poop away in the trash can. But I don't like to do that because if someone observes you,
interesting.
All they're seeing is a stranger, reaching through the bars and dropping something in the trash. which tells them that there's this affordance that, hey, anyone can just come by this, parking lot trash can and dump their trash in there.
Whoa, so that's that's like a temporal signifier, like so that's interesting.
Yes,
that's actually, I think that's a great example.
Yeah, because I will basically I will only throw something away if I am in the parking lot.
Yes,
because I just want to, I want to, even if someone observes me doing something, it will be, the universe will be correct. I think this is definitely like, partially my neuroses, but it seems like an example of this.
This is very interesting because this is kind of the opposite of what I thought you were going to say. Like, if people say spirit of the law, not the letter of the law, I feel like generally that means they're going to violate the law. You know what I mean? And maybe
right. Which I have, the thing that I've most observed in myself is actually the opposite, where I obey a quote unquote law that I don't have to. Yeah. I add a restriction to myself in order to maintain, the quote unquote spirit of the law. Because obviously, based on the letter of the law, I can use this trash can. Like I own a condo, I can use the parking lot trash can, but I choose not to use it under certain circumstances because of the outward, observed implication of my behavior. Anyway, this is ridiculous. God. We can move on.
No, that's great. That is great. You were going to reference something else.
Yeah. So the next thing he talked about was mapping, which I found really interesting. And basically what this means is, you have some piece of functionality that maps to something taking place, which, he uses the example of a steering wheel. It's like you turn the wheel to the right and it maps to the car actually, turning to the right. And one of the things he mentioned in this part of the chapter that I thought was awesome was that apparently there were cars that had reins, like a horse.
What?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I guess I missed this. That's crazy.
I mean, maybe I was like reading this incorrectly, but he mentioned that, vehicles have had many different types of, steering wheels, like joysticks or, buttons or whatever. And he mentioned reins. And I was like, dude, let's bring back cars with reins. Like, it sounds amazing. I want my car to like neigh every once in a while.
Yes.
Maybe
Tesla's
a nicker.
Bring back the reins. Yeah. Can they, I don't know, make it more horse-like? That would be the big thing.
I would enjoy that. Some sort of like, because I think riding a horse is cool, but I don't want to I feel like I don't want to say animal cruelty. That's like super extreme, but like, I don't necessarily want to ride a horse, but I would ride like a technological horse where it felt like I was riding a horse. Like, that'd be kind of cool.
I could see Elon making that joke and then like following through on it, because they have the robot, the Tesla robot. Like, they can make the Tesla e-horse.
No, team up with Boston Dynamics, get a horse that I can hit with a broomstick.
Yeah.
He also mentioned during this mapping part culture. This was where he actually brought up culture. Mm-hmm. And it just made me think of like the Up is Down video game gang. I wanted to ask you, which gang are you a part of? Is Up down?
I'm pretty sure Up is up. I just recently opened Jack and Daxter, the video game on the PS2.
Oh yeah.
And they had a setting so that, and I guess most video games do, but you could independently control whether the vertical camera axis was flipped or the horizontal axis was flipped.
Right.
Which was great because whatever it was weird. I think the horizontal axis was was flipped. And
flipping the horizontal axis is straight psychotic, in my opinion. But flipping the vertical axis is interesting because I do feel like there's a lot of metaphors that actually make sense. Like for a plane, for example. Like I would expect that if I pushed the joystick forward, like the front of the plane would tilt down. And I honestly don't know if this is like a cultural thing or if there's some weird thing in my brain that just makes that make sense.
I think it's an experience thing where it's like whatever initial experience you have, you get used to that, because it's like I don't think there's anything biological that's kind of indicating whether this like joystick experience is going to map onto like a camera experience. You know, it's all just about like your expectation.
Well, I don't know, because I think of it like the joystick as the head. You know, like let's say you took the joystick and you rotated it 90 degrees forward. Like that is the front of the plane. So if you turn the joystick to the right, the plane's going to turn right. But if you push the joystick forward, the plane's actually going to tilt downward. Like, I think that mapping exists in my brain. But obviously, I'm not sure. This could totally be a cultural thing, which is why I actually think this whole, bringing up culture in the context of design is super interesting. Because
right. And I guess that's what we're saying. Both of us are saying, like, it's a nurture thing. Like, it's something cultural. Yeah. But there's nothing kind of innate to you that means that you, like, innate in your genetics that would cause you to think that way. Or do you think that that's true? It's part of your genetics.
I question it. I don't know. Like, I'm honestly asking, or I'm honestly unsure whether pushing a joystick up and a plane tilting forward is just something I've learned, or if there is a metaphor in my head that is just like a fact of nature or whatever.
I mean, this does dovetail pretty neatly into mental models.
Yes.
You have kind of a mental model of when you're pushing the joystick, you just imagine the nose of the plane going down.
Right.
So this is something I think about constantly in my day job. I think mental models is super important to have as a software engineer, especially when there's any sort of non-trivial mapping onto like the way that you're representing the data on disk versus like what the user is seeing.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know. Do you have any experiences with like user mental models, or I don't know, opinions about, like, do you keep that in mind when you're working? Or
I definitely try to. This is something that I've done more and more in my career, is really try to remove myself from like, my own context as an engineer, and really try to put myself into the position of a user. And it's very hard for me to do, because I almost have to like forget what I know about a situation.
Yes.
And try to independently develop like a mental model of a user who is a stranger to me and to my application, and just imagine how they might use it. I don't know how well I am able to do this, but I do know that I've gotten better at least questioning my own decision making and like the decision making of teammates. And I think, one of the important things you can do in your career, if you're an engineer, is really just question design decisions. Mm-hmm. Just the act of questioning it forces you and your teammates to think more about it. And that will, could lead to a better outcome. I guess it could also lead to a worse outcome, but I think generally in my experience, it leads to a better outcome.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that was kind of everything I had. Were there any other thoughts you had about this chapter?
So I only had one more note that I want to call out. And that is that he kept talking about these bad examples of design, but I felt like he was being a little bit vague. And I kept thinking in my head, like, come on, dude, just call people out. Like, I want to hear, I want to hear like the company that designed this thing, and I want to hear the exact scenario. And so I was worried this whole book was just going to be these vague, like, oh, this is a poorly designed thing. But then towards the end of the book, he had that rant about refrigerators.
GE.
And he called out General Electric. And I was like, oh, yeah, I love this sass. And I'm looking forward to hearing a more sass, more calling out of explicit companies.
I do wonder if they stopped selling this, because this book came out in 2013. So I could imagine that they like redesigned their fridges.
Oh, I hope so. Don Norman calls you out. You got to change. You got to fix your
exactly.
stuff.
You got something wrong. You got to take a hard look in the mirror.
Yeah. You don't want a Norman refrigerator to like become the term used. to
Yeah,
refer to your stuff.
GE refrigerators. You got one of those Norman refrigerators, eh? Well, I don't think we have to at least explain at a high level the what was wrong with the fridge. So this dovetails with the mental model section.
Yes. Yeah.
And so the way that it worked, there was a freezer temperature control knob and a fridge, like a refrigerator temperature control knob. And like what this alludes to is there's two temperature control systems and each of them are controlled individually, right? Pretty reasonable expectation of a user mental model when you see that. But actually, I still don't completely understand how these knobs are supposed to work together.
Yeah.
But one of the knobs seems to control like how cold the like really cold air is in the system. And then the other knob is just controlling like a percentage breakdown between the freezer and the fridge.
Yeah.
So it's basically like, okay, you need to think about, okay, I'm diverting a certain percentage of the cold air between the fridge and freezer with the one knob, and then controlling like the overall coldness with the other knob.
Yes. Yeah. Harkening back to something we were talking about earlier, I felt like it was an example of a deep implementation detail, like surfacing into the public user API, where, it's like a user should not have to be concerned with how many coolers there are, like, these exact things. Like a user, they have a problem they're trying to solve. They're trying to get their fridge to be colder or their freezer to be colder. So those are the knobs you should give them.
The thing that's wild to me is like, just put that on the knob. Like you can tell it's so obvious that like you can tell that they knew that this is what users would want.
Yes.
So it's like, okay, if you're gonna skimp out on the engineering work to actually make it work that way, the very least you could do is label the knobs correctly. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, put name the one temperature and name the other one like split or whatever. I don't know. Like maybe they couldn't come up with a good name because that split is a terrible name for that.
Yeah.
But like,
that's another thing. There's got to be I wonder if he's going to talk about naming. Because in software, at least, like, man, that is such a hard problem.
No, it's one of the two hard problems, right? And you already talked about the other one, cache invalidation.
Yep.
All right, so I don't know. Maybe let's wrap it there. Did you have anything else you wanted to say?
No, just that I'm excited to read more. This book is very interesting so far.
I think this book is way more broadly, like, anyone who kind of works in a technical field, like, I think that they would enjoy reading this. It's, I think I was afraid it was going to be a little bit too wonky, and it's very easy to get through, I would say.
Yeah, agree.
All right. Well, I'll see you next time, John.
See you next time. Have a lovely weekend.
You too.